The night shift colleague. He knew things about me he shouldn't have. I used to work the overnight shift at a logistics warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place where the parking lot lights flicker at 2 a.m. The security cameras have been broken for years, and management stopped caring long before I got there. My coworker on that shift was a man named Dale. Dale was in his mid-50s, quiet in the way that isn't peaceful. It's the kind of quiet that feels like something being held back. He never ate lunch with anyone. He never talked about a family, a home, a life outside those fluorescent-lit aisles. He just showed up every night at 10:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the shift started, and clocked out at exactly 6 a.m., never a minute over. At first I kept my distance, the way you do when something about a person makes your gut tighten without explanation. But after 3 months of working side by side, I started to relax around him. He was helpful. He remembered things, where misplaced orders ended up, which dock door stuck in the cold, which supervisor to avoid. I started thinking I'd misjudged him. Then one night, he said something that stopped my blood cold. We were doing inventory in aisle 34, the back corner of the warehouse where the heating barely reached. He was counting pallets a few feet from me, and suddenly, without looking up from his clipboard, he said, "You shouldn't drive home on Route 9 anymore. Take the bypass." I laughed a little. "Why's that?" He finally looked at me. His eyes didn't change expression when he talked. They just stayed flat, steady. "A man got hit there last Tuesday. Hit and run. Died on the scene. Nobody's caught whoever did it yet." I felt a prickle on the back of my neck because I hadn't heard anything about that. No news alerts. Nobody mentioned it at the start of shift. I went home that morning and searched for it. Nothing online, nothing in the local paper. I assumed Dale had gotten confused, maybe imagined it. But 6 days later, a story ran in the county paper. A hit and run on Route 9. The victim had died on scene. The date it had happened? The Tuesday before Dale warned me. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe he'd heard it from someone. Maybe he just processed news differently, from a scanner, from a neighbor, from somewhere I hadn't looked. I told myself all of that and almost believed it. But it kept happening. He told me about a fire at a restaurant downtown 3 days before it made headlines. He told me my car battery was going to fail. I replaced it 2 days later when it died in the parking lot at 5 a.m. I thought about how he'd said it, like he was reading off a list. He told me my sister was going to call me with bad news. She called that afternoon. Our mother had fallen. I started watching him differently after that. I paid attention to the small things. The way he'd go silent for a moment before saying something strange, like he was listening to something just outside the range of hearing. The way he never seemed surprised by anything. The way he never asked questions, not curious ones anyway. The only questions Dale ever asked were confirming ones. Asterisk, you ended up taking the bypass, right? Asterisk, not like he was checking. Like he already knew the answer. One night in February, I worked up the courage to ask him directly. We were on break, sitting in the dim break room. I just said, "Dale, how do you know things before they happen?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know things before they happen. I remember them. That doesn't make sense." He looked down at his coffee cup. "I know. I didn't push it. I don't know why. Fear, mostly. The kind of fear that tells you some doors are better left shut." A week later, Dale didn't show up for his shift. Then he didn't show up for the next one. HR said he'd resigned without notice and left no forwarding address. The supervisor acted like Dale had barely existed. Had to go back through the records to even confirm his hire date. What I found in my locker on his last night terrified me more than anything else. A folded piece of paper with 5 words written in his handwriting. Asterisk, don't go in on Thursday. Asterisk, I didn't go in on Thursday. I called in sick. That night, a forklift malfunctioned in aisle 34. The exact spot where Dale and I used to do inventory, and crushed a cart stacked with steel shelving. The on-duty worker standing 2 feet from it walked away, with a bruised shoulder, barely. 2 feet in either direction, the investigators said, and someone would have died. I never found out what Dale was. I never found out where he went. Some nights, working a different job now, I still think about what he said. Asterisk, I don't know things before they happen. I remember them, asterisk, and I wonder what timeline he remembered it all from. And I wonder if I'm still in it. The woman in HR, she was collecting something on all of you. She worked at a mid-size insurance company for 4 years, and for most of that time, I had no reason to think about the HR department beyond onboarding, paperwork, and the annual review cycle. HR was on the 3rd floor. I was on the 2nd. Our worlds didn't cross much. The woman who ran HR was named Miriam. She was impeccably dressed, always neutral tones, always a blazer, with silver hair pulled back so tight it seemed to strain the skin at her temples. She smiled at everyone in the halls. She remembered your birthday without checking a calendar. She sent handwritten cards for promotions and condolences. Everyone loved Miriam. She was exactly what you'd want from HR, but something started nagging at me about 8 months before. I eventually left that job. It started when a coworker of mine, a guy named Brett from accounting, abruptly resigned one afternoon. No 2 weeks' notice. Just gone. He and I had grabbed lunch twice a week for 3 years. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't answer my calls or texts after. When I asked around, nobody had an explanation. Someone had heard he moved out of state. Someone else thought there'd been a family emergency. HR, of course, couldn't comment on a personnel matter. About a month after Brett vanished, I was working late and needed a document. I'd accidentally routed to the wrong printer, one on the 3rd floor. I went up to grab it after most people had already gone home. The printer was just down the hall from Miriam's office, and as I passed her door, I noticed it was slightly open. Not enough to see inside, but enough to hear. She was on the phone. Her voice was low and controlled, but the building was empty, and the sound carried. He won't be an issue anymore, she was saying. I made sure of that. I stopped walking. My heart rate climbed. It's already done. His access was revoked at noon. He doesn't know why. He won't know why. A pause. Then, they never do. Grabbed my document and walked back to the elevator as calmly as I could manage. I told myself it was a termination call. A messy HR situation. That was her job, managing difficult exits. I told myself a dozen reasonable explanations before I got back to my car, but I kept thinking about Brett, about how he'd seemed fine at lunch the week before he disappeared, about how he'd mentioned he was thinking about applying for the senior analyst role that had just opened, about how enthusiastic he was about the company's future. Nobody who's about to quit talks like that. I started paying attention to patterns. Over the next 6 months, even people who just politely pushed back on a policy, they were gone within 60 days. I started asking around, carefully, casually, whether anyone else had noticed the pattern. Most people hadn't, but one woman in compliance named Therese pulled me aside after I'd raised the subject too close to the wrong ears and said, "Stop asking about Miriam." I asked, "Why?" Therese looked at me the way you look at someone who's standing too close to the edge of something without knowing it, because she has files on everyone. Asterisk, personal asterisk files. Things she shouldn't know. Things you haven't told anyone. I felt the air go out of my lungs. "What do you mean?" She referenced my medical history in a review once. "I've never disclosed that to anyone at this company. I don't know how she got it." Therese glanced down the hallway. "And the people who question her or get in her way, they leave. And they don't fight it. I don't know what she does, but they don't fight it." I went home that night. She once mentioned offhand that she knew my commute had gotten harder since I moved, but I had never told anyone at work that I'd moved. She once referenced a dinner I'd attended at a restaurant downtown, something I'd mentioned to no one in the office. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Now my skin was crawling. I put in my notice 2 weeks later. I kept it vague, new opportunity. excited about the change. Miriam walked me through the exit interview herself. Her smile was wide and warm. She said all the right things, but she said, "Safe travels." He lived in another state. He had nothing to do with my professional life. I had never spoken about him to anyone in that building. I turned around. I left. I never went back. To this day, I don't know what Miriam was doing. I don't know if what she had on people was genuinely dangerous or just deeply invasive. I don't know whether Brett and the others left on their own terms or were forced out in ways I can't explain. I know that every former co-worker has either not responded or claimed. I noticed that whenever someone had a conflict with Miriam, even minor ones, not work files, she knows things, and thought about my own situation. When I reached the door to leave for the last time, "Give your father my regards." My father had never been mentioned to her. She was already looking back down at her desk. I never responded. I've reached back out to